Hi, friends. Welcome to this very special session with a very dear friend and an honored guest in my world, Joan Liu. You're going to get to meet Joan in just a second. I just want to say, by way of logistics, yes, we are sending out the recording. You're going to get any links that we mention that are going to be sent out. We'll send a follow-up email. Thank you for those of you who are logging on late at night or early in the morning. We know we couldn't get everybody out in the world every time zone correct, but just thank you for showing up for this. And with that, I'll say, Joan, thank you for being here. I'm so grateful to be in your presence and grateful that you're sharing your time with us this way.
Thanks for having me on.
So I'd love for you to just set context a little bit about the work that you do. Tell us about Second Chance, your organization, and how it got started.
This organization got started out of a crisis. In 2018, there was a university in Texas that over scholarshiped by mistake. And so after April 1st, they had to withdraw and revoke 60 scholarships from 60 students, and those 60 students were from Nepal. And so I and a few other folks, now known as the Nepal Justice League, stepped in and created a movement around these students. And after April 1st, tried to seat these students and resurrect their futures. And so that is how Second Chance got started.
Yeah, if anybody's interested, we have a whole podcast on that. You can hear in the former library, the College of Psych library. So today, a few things I want to talk about. So just to set context for folks, today we're going to talk about what is the typical profile for a student who is competitive for full financial aid, speaking specifically to international students, which is when we say international, we realize that, well, what is international? We're talking about a student who is applying to the United States in many cases, who is not from the United States. We will also be talking about options beyond the United States. We're going to talk about common mistakes that full need international students make when applying to college and universities in the US. We're going to talk about how to students figure out which schools meet full need and where should they even start. So I'd love to start, Joan, with this question. When you think about a typical profile for an international student who's competitive for full financial aid in the United States, what are some of the markers? What are some of the things that colleges are looking for?
Um, so first, if I could set some context, in the
Please.
United States, of the 4,000 schools that exist, I would say that less than 1% of them offer a full ride. And so let's define a full ride as full tuition, room, and board. So housing costs, and then also tuition. And of that 1%, it is really, really, really hard to get a full scholarship. And so I'm talking today from the perspective of a student who really needs that. And I mean needs that, not just wants it, but needs it, cannot otherwise come. And so when you're talking about that niche of schools and students applying and at those schools it being ridiculously competitive, you can imagine that you'd have to be yourself really competitive. So what does that mean? Let's break this up into two pieces. One would be the quantitative piece and then the qualitative piece. For the quantitative piece, you're usually seeing a student who is a top student at their school, like in the top 1 to 10%, I would say, more usually like the top 1 or 2%. You are seeing a student who has strong external testing. And so depending on the context, that means very high SAT scores or a high ACT score. You're also seeing students who have really strong external examinations. So for example, if you're coming in from Ghana and you're taking the WASI examination, or you're taking A levels, or you're taking, for example, the Turkish lycée, you are often, not the Turkish lycée, but the Turkish national exam, you would be earning within the top 5% of the nation, like top 1 to 10% of the nation. In other words, you've got strong international signals. Everybody,
Yeah.
when I'm saying these numbers, I don't want you to think, God, it's a hard and fast rule. But okay, because that's why I'm kind of getting a little bit nervous and stumbling over my words a bit.
That's okay.
You want to be really basically internationally competitive.
Yeah.
To be internationally competitive, you've got to have some national signals, So if I could just give you an example of a student that we worked with at Second Chance,
Yeah.
um, a student from Ghana with 8 A1s on the WASI examination in West Africa from Ghana, 1580 on the SAT, and a member of the National Math and Science Quiz, top 9 who got to the finals in the country. Like that's really the
Yeah.
level. And that's a competitive level, okay? It's not a requirement, but it indicates that you're really competitive. That's the quantitative side. Then the qualitative side, we really want to see that you are impactful. You're whatever kind of leader that you are community orientated. So in the same sort of things that you would be looking for from a full pay applicant still also apply, but we want to be seeing that also at a very strong level. So usually that means beyond the school. So you've got like, your classroom impact, you've got school impact, you've got beyond the school impact, like district impact, then you've got national impact, you've got international impact. We want to see you more towards the top end of that qualitative scale.
Mhm.
So both on the quantitative and on the qualitative, we need to see a very strong applicant. Because think about it from the US side. We're going to invest, in some cases, almost $400,000
Mhm.
in a 17 or 18-year-old. That is an enormous amount of money to put into somebody so young. So that's why you've got to have that level of signal.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so, I think the way that you're putting it is really interesting. It's just thinking of this as like, for students who are on the call, like they're investing in you an incredible amount of money, 400,000 more, or more. They want to know that, you're really going to be able to show up, do, whatever the institution is, level work, work well in the community, et cetera. When it comes to like when on the college admission side, when they're evaluating applicants, Joan, how is it different from the way that international applicants are evaluated versus, say, domestic applicants? And even beyond that, when it comes to a student who's applying from outside the US who is full need, meaning requires lots of money, versus, say, full pay, meaning that they're going to, whatever, pay the full tuition.
Okay, so American institutions are American institutions that have a small portion of their population on their campuses that comprise of international students. Let's define an international student as somebody who needs an F1 visa to be able to study in the United States. And so when you have a school that has 90% Americans and maybe 10% international, or maybe it's 80% domestic US citizens and 20% international, all of the international students are really competing for that 20% or that 10% or that 8% or whatever it is at the school. And schools will say how many of their or what portion of their population is international. Schools will define that differently. Some schools will define it just as F1 students. Other schools will include in that dual citizens. So there are kind of, in a sense, kind of two buckets of students. And what you want to remember as an international student is that within the international bucket, there is also, in a sense, two buckets. There are students who can pay full freight for the cost of education. And then there are students who need financial aid. And the students who need financial aid will vary. Maybe there will be some students who will need like 20% of the cost of attendance. Other people will need 50% of the cost of attendance. The more that you need, okay, the more that an institution has to invest in you, the harder it is to get in. And I want to be really clear about this because on every website, you will have a number that says, here is our admission rate. So for example, the admission rate could be something like 23% in general as an average. But the admit rate for students needing full financial aid, so we're talking you need full tuition, room and board, is often less than 1%. It is often less than 1%. What does this mean? It means that it is just as hard to get into a school that is need aware and meets full need than Harvard, right? Like this is as competitive basically. And so one shouldn't be thinking, well, this school is less well known, therefore it's going to be easier to get into than, Harvard, Princeton, Yale. It's just not going to be the case. At any level, trying to get a full scholarship is going to be quite hard. So if you have 10 schools that you're applying to, okay, and 3 of them are super well known in your country, and some of them are not, all of them are actually going to be really hard to get into. And schools do not break this down on their website, okay? It is fairly opaque. So you won't know. You'll think, oh, it is 23%. It's not. It is going to be less than 1%, oftentimes, for a student needing full financial aid. It's competitive. So it's like the admissions Hunger Games.
Yeah, I laugh because I just literally just watched that series with my daughter. And I want to say, so I really hear what you're saying, and we've talked about this before,
Yeah.
but I want to say to students who are listening, there is hope. Like that we're sort of starting from this, it's competitive at these certain institutions in the United States, but there is hope. I'm sort of signaling a little bit about where what, Joan is going to get to in just a little bit. But I'd love to maybe get to you know, what are some of those common mistakes? And let's speak specifically to full need international students. What are some of the
Mhm.
common mistakes that they make when they're applying to colleges and universities in the US?
So number one, only applying to schools that are quote unquote famous.
Mhm.
Everybody is applying to those schools. You've Googled them, and you're only going to apply to schools that you have heard of. And so if you are a student here who has the great fortune of having a school-based counselor, and you say to your school-based counselor, but I've got to go to this school. Like this is not the way to be approaching full financial aid. It is when you are thinking about full financial aid, you want to be thinking about where can you have a chance of getting a full scholarship, because it's not just the name of the school in this case.
Mhm.
It's you've got to be able to go with a full scholarship. And that actually is more important than the name of the school, I've got to say, because if you can end up at a school in the United States where you do get full tuition and room and board, you will have earned an opportunity to to increase your global mobility, your social mobility, your economic opportunity, your employment prospects, and that is the golden ticket in a sense. So I would say that having a very fixed mindset about where one can and cannot apply is going to limit you. You've got to be able to go beyond. I mean, we often talk about going beyond the usual suspects. How do you know if you, for example, created a good list? You've got a couple schools that your friends have never heard of. That is actually really wise. Okay, that is
Yeah.
actually really, really wise. And you want to also go beyond. There are different buckets in the United States of how you can get a full scholarship. Like you could apply to a need blind school, of which there are only a handful, and get a full scholarship. That's number one. Number two, you could apply to need aware meets full need schools, of which there are not that many. Those are two buckets. You're only applying to those two buckets. You need to diversify and also apply to, for example, merit-based scholarships. Merit-based scholarships meaning you don't even need to submit a financial aid document for that. Like whether or not you are a full pay student or a full need student, you're applying for a merit scholarship, because at the end of the day, what do you care if it came from a merit-based scholarship or a full need scholarship or a need blind scholarship? It's going to be um, finances that are removed, right? Financial barriers that are removed for you. So that is what matters. I would also say, I'm sorry, this is such a long answer, Ethan.
No,
Very
it's
specific about
great. No, keep going.
the second thing that I see students making a mistake about is that they will not apply early decision. Okay, they just
So
say to themselves,
the
they're
mistake
just
is
like,
not
I'm
applying.
yeah, for the states, they're just like, I'm just going to apply regular decision because I want to be able to compare.
And
There
what do you
may
say to that?
be, yeah, there might be nothing to compare with.
Yeah.
You are going to be great if you can just get one. These days, if you can just get one, then that's all you need. So when you miss early decision, and then you miss early decision two, and then you move into the regular decision round. Like if you aren't using all 3 rounds, I mean, it's better to use all 3 rounds. Now, granted, there's like a a few schools that would just say, okay, if you want us, do regular, but those are the minority of schools in the 1%. Most schools, think about it from a US standpoint. If I'm going to invest $400,000 or $300,000 in a student, don't I want to know that I could yield that student? That that student's coming to me? Like I pick that student and that student's picking me? So that's why you want to use all three rounds. Early decision one, early decision two, regular decision. Use all three rounds. If you're only using one round, and we're talking about a highly rejected process, can you see why this would be kind of damaging to your prospects? So to optimize your chances, you do ED1, ED2, and RD. Okay, I've now said that out three different ways. Okay, so that's the second mistake that I also see. The other thing is that if you're an engineer, okay, so this is point number three. If you're an engineer, engineering is by far, it is so hard to get full financial aid because think about it. All these schools in this 1%, okay, all these schools are not that many. They all don't have engineering. So if you are engineering, please, will you also think about, could you do pure physics? Could you do pure maths? Like that will also open things up. So maybe you want to do engineering at some schools, and maybe you want to just apply for physics and math at other schools. All right, that will open it up. Like sort of being a little bit broader about your course if you're an engineer. Okay. And let's see. Point number four, you do not take the SAT when you can. Okay, now there's going to be some controversy about this because there is in the United States the opportunity to submit or not submit your testing. But I would say that the last mistake is that kids only apply to the United States. There is US centrism. Okay. And so what we do at Second Chance and what we see is basically a lot of students who end up on a wait list or they get gapped. Gapping means that you maybe got a scholarship, but it's not enough for you to go. So you still have $52,000 out of $72,000 that you got to pay. And there's no way that your family can afford $200,000 while your family's making like $7,000 a year. I'm talking in USD. So taking the SAT allows you to build a global list. And I would say that if there is one thing that I would like everybody to take away, particularly in this geopolitical climate, would be that it is really wise to do a global list. The only reason really why we were able to support those 60 students in 2018 from Nepal is because we insisted on a strategy that was global. First of all, there's no way that you can get 60 scholarships in the United States after April 1st. And that would be hard to do during the course of the school year. But the only way that we were able to reseat 56 of those kids was to take a global strategic approach. And so those 56 kids ended up in 6 different countries. They ended up in Canada, Germany, South Korea, Qatar. They didn't end up just in the United States. And for those of you who are like, oh my gosh, but if I go to Qatar or if I go to South Korea, don't I have to learn another language? No, you don't. There's a lot of English medium institutions now around the world, in the UAE, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, where I am phoning in South Korea. And so we want to have a global list. And so those are the common mistakes that I see students make, is this sort of very myopic. Really, what I'm generally saying is you're being super myopic. You're like zeroing in on one school and it's got to be that school. I've got to just marry this person. And then not diversifying in terms of, full, like need blind, need aware meets full need, merit scholarships, like diversifying your list, and then just zeroing in only on the United States. And that is what is going to make it much harder for you.
Yeah, what I hear you, I love what you're saying, and what I appreciate is that I sense that what you're saying is expanding our definition of success in the process. And I think sometimes students come into this process and they think success looks like getting into Stanford, and if I don't get into Stanford, then I'm a failure or that I failed. And what I hear you saying is like, if we can broaden what we mean by success, what success looks like in this process, that can be helpful and give us some more options potentially.
And even if I could just say one word to the counselors who are on this on this webinar with us. First of all, as a counselor, you play such a critical role in this process for students who are this vulnerable and who need full freight to go to college. And I would really urge counselors here to, as much as possible, learn about schools beyond the United States, because it is really hard. And in the space that I sit in, I sit in the space after the cycle is done, and we get all these applications, hundreds of applications. And really, the mistake was kids only applied to the United States. They are really talented. In fact, we see a lot of kids end up on the wait list of Ivy League schools, really selective schools. And we see those students, and what we try to do is we try to second chance them, right? But this webinar is for us to not have to use a second chance. Okay, it's for, we want first shot during the regular admissions, right? We want you to be in a position where you don't need a second chance, or you don't need a second gap year or a third gap year. Okay, so kids, diversify. And if you have a school-based counselor, listen to your counselor. If your counselor has been saying to you, this is like, we would rather, please listen to me. Instead of doing Stanford ED, do this school ED. You need to be listening to your counselor.
Yeah. A couple questions came in that I think are good ones that folks may wonder about. So someone asks, when schools like Harvard and MIT say they're need blind for international students, is it true that they're need blind?
Yes,
Meaning they
they're need
won't
blind.
factor?
They are
And
need blind.
just to clarify, they won't factor whether the applicant needs financial aid at all.
No. They
So
are need blind. They are
yes,
need.
in other words, they're telling the truth, is what you're saying.
Yes. And um, so at a need blind school, the admit rate between full pay kids and full need kids will not differ, right, with international students.
Yeah.
But at a need aware school, the admit rate will differ. It will be like, oh, we'll admit 35% of students who need nothing, okay? But
Yeah.
it'll be less than 1% for kids who need everything. If you think about this, this makes sense, right? Because a United States university has a limited number, got a limited budget, and they can't, unless you're MIT or Harvard, you just don't have the means to support everybody who is. So yes, it is the case. Please trust that the need blind schools are need blind.
Yeah. Another question came in. You mentioned the importance of ED1, ED2, and then regular decision. How important is early action for international students, would you say?
Well, early action is not binding.
Mhm.
So I would say that you don't have the same sort of lift in early action as in early decision. I think early action is still important, and I think you still should use the early action round. But I mean, early decision, if you're a counselor listening to this, early decision, as we all know in the admissions industry, early decision is where you could have an advantage, right?
Mhm.
It's a little easier to get in early decision. And the same applies with kids who need full financial aid.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple questions are coming in around testing. So I want to talk about testing a little bit because, some colleges, many colleges and universities are remaining test optional. But how should international students think about the SAT or the ACT? And what if testing is, say, difficult to access?
But it's one thing if SATs are difficult to access, okay? Because in Syria, you can't take the SAT. All right. In Afghanistan, you're not taking the SAT. But if you are in a country where the SAT is available, I would recommend that you travel to your capital city and take the SAT. And the reason why I'm recommending that, and again, I think that this is going to be controversial, is because we see the value of the SAT when we are trying to seat students beyond the United States, especially. Both in the United States and beyond the United States, we see the value of it. And so, this year at Second Chance, we seated 53 kids from 22 countries after April 1st with a full scholarship. And the last 3 students to be seated were students who did not have the SAT. And that's a small data set, but we've been doing this now for 7 years. And beyond this, I have done this at the schools that I've worked at. So I've worked in Turkey, where there's a lot of students who needed full financial aid. And I worked with, in its earliest stages, the Sutton Trust in the UK, which is also working with high need students, and also at the United World College, which is where my last position was. I was at UWC SEA in Singapore. And the SAT is really, it opens up options for you globally. So if you're able to take it, please take it. And I would say that the SAT does not cause inequality. My position is that the SAT reveals inequality. So if you're a kid from Cameroon, I'm going to use an actual example of a kid that we worked with this year. You're a kid from Cameroon, and this kid that we have been working with traveled 16 hours to get to the capital and back to take his SAT, and he was able to get over 1,500. Like, that is extraordinary for a student whose parents did not even graduate primary school. And that reveals an exceptionalism in circumstances that are extremely difficult. So I would say that it is helpful. So what does this mean if you're a counselor and you've told kids, oh my gosh, like, go test optional? That's one thing that is really helpful that we did in Turkey. Was in earlier stages of a student's journey, we would work with a local SAT test prep firm, and we would ask for a couple of pro bono seats each year, because kids are going out and doing test prep. A lot of kids are in the United States particularly are going out and doing test prep. And so we are kind of aware of the sort of larger machinery around our schools. And we can always go, and there are a lot of, I would say, increasing number of test prep providers who want to do this. They very much want to be supportive of students who do not have the means. So that's a more long-term thing. You can't do anything about it between now and November 1st, which is coming up, but it's something to kind of keep in mind for the longer term.
Mhm. Tell me, you can reject this question if you want, but there's a student who's like, hey, most of the scores I'm seeing are above 1,400. Like, what do I
Yeah.
do? Is there some sort of number unofficially that is sort of like you want to aim for, getting X number that you're willing to say on a recording? Or like what should students be looking for?
So I do think that it is the US is context dependent, right? So when you're applying to the United States and you have a lower score, like in the 1200s or the 1300s, and you're coming from a very severe context, that will be taken into consideration in the United States. Okay. But when you start to move to definitely outside the United States, like Hong Kong, South Korea, Singapore, the UAE, we really, at second chance, our threshold is 1450. And the reason why it's a 1450, okay, is because we find that is, from a data standpoint, where a kid minimally needs to be for us to be able to see. I mean, trying to place a student after April 1st is a Herculean endeavor. Never mind during the school year, okay? It's quite, we're the only ones right now, as far as I know, that are doing this. We're first in category. And that is our threshold. It's a threshold for a reason. Occasionally, we will take a student who is lower than that because we are taking into account circumstances. But in that case, we're kind of taking a little bit of a risk because we know we can't send that student everywhere. We know that we can only send that student to like certain places in the world that are more context dependent. So I wouldn't say that, guys, I don't want you to hear, oh my God, it's over for me. I want you to understand that this is what we typically see. And I think the other thing is that from a US standpoint, if I'm a US school and I see a student who has done really well in school, I need an external validation point to legitimize that, because there is also increasing fraud in the landscape. So it's a legitimacy, or it's a like a kind of external signal. If you don't have national exams in your country and this is the only external signal that you have, it's an important external signal, because otherwise we just have the transcript. And think about it, if I'm looking at students across the world, it is helpful to see that external signaling. I'm not going to speak for US institutions in this sense, because US institutions, they are really context dependent, and students can choose whether or not to submit testing. I'm really talking about how to build a global list, Ethan. So I
Yeah.
hope I'm being very clear about that in
Yeah.
regards to when you are building a global list, which I want, and I hope that you will do that with a counselor, that trying to aim as high as you can on the SAT is really important.
And when students can't, what are some other tests or markers of those external validation that they could get besides the
Okay,
SAT?
besides that, if you have done national competitions, like there is some sort of external competition that you've done, that's like an Olympiad, like an international Olympiad or a national Olympiad, that also signals that you're nationally competitive from an external point of view beyond your school, right? We're looking for external signals. The US requires external signals.
Yeah.
We are one of the few systems that requires third-party endorsement, right? Like you need a teacher recommendation number one, a teacher recommendation number two, a counselor recommendation. We're looking for external signals in general in the United States. And so we are not a country that just looks at one score and that's it. Like in some places of the world, that is it. That was it for my parents. You take one exam and that is the determination factor. And you don't get to say anything about you don't get to have an essay. You don't get to have third parties speak. So I hope that makes sense. Sorry, that was
Yeah.
very long-winded.
No, totally. That there are other tests. So there are national tests, if you can afford things like APs is something that we talked about,
Mhm.
setting up for this. What about, talk to me about English proficiency? How do students prove English proficiency? And how important is that?
Yeah. English proficiency is important because you are studying at an English medium institution. And a shout out to all the students out there for whom English is not your first language. You were so courageous to want to go and leave your country and study in a country that's not yours, in a language that's not yours. It's so courageous. And so English proficiency is really important, not just on a conversational level so that you can speak to your roommates and you can speak to kids on campus, but also academically, right? Everything is in English. And so it is a requirement oftentimes to submit English proficiency. And so that means taking the TOEFL or taking the IELTS or take the DET. Okay, if you are a student who has no means, please take the Duolingo English test, please. I mean, this is I mean, you can get a test waiver and you want to try to aim for uh, on our for second chance, we require like a 130 and above. Usually that's kind of what we're looking for. Like 120 and above in that realm. That's a good realm to be in.
So a few folks have asked about this, but I'm really curious. When students are thinking about developing their college list, how should, and let's stay with for the moment, full need international students, how should they think about developing their college list?
Um, they should think about where they will be at the top of the pool. Okay. Not just can I get in? So you got to be at the top of that pool to get a scholarship.
Mhm.
So this isn't just the question isn't can I get in or can I reach for it? The question is, do I think I'm going to be at the top of that pool?
Mhm.
That's a different question, right?
Mhm.
And so unless you have a lot of national or international signals, this is a hard proposition, correct? So you want to make sure that the list is diversified and that it's not just crowded at the top with all schools that are admitting less than 5% of its applicants.
Mhm. Mhm.
That is a bit of a recipe for disaster. So I would say really try to diversify the list. Please try to include some schools that you know your family is unaware of. I think that's kind of just like in general without mentioning actual schools. I'm trying hard not to mention actual schools. Um, you want to have a diversification of list, and again, you want to be thinking of different buckets of schools. So like full, like need aware meets full need schools. You want to be thinking of like schools that have merit scholarships. You want to be thinking of schools that have um, you know, need blind policies.
Mhm.
You should think about the list also including beyond the United States so that you can have a diversification.
Mhm.
And you want to be thinking about your list as something that you try to collaborate with with your school counselor. Your school counselor, if you are lucky enough to have one, is a pot of gold. This is the person who, beyond your family, wants you to make it. They, second to your family, they're the next person in line who desperately wants you to make it and who desperately wants you to have access to higher education. So please don't be difficult with your counselor. Please try to listen to what your counselor is saying. Your counselor has your best interests at heart.
Mhm. Mhm.
If
And
you don't have a counselor, okay, if you don't have a counselor, most
yeah.
students around the world do not have a counselor. There are 470 Education USA offices around the world. They give free and accurate advice. There is usually one or more of these offices in most countries or a neighboring country. So for example, Belarus right now has Education USA in Lithuania, okay? And what you want to do is you want to reach out to that Education USA office, because the schools that come and visit you in your country already have an interest in your country. And your Education USA office probably has hosted some of those visits for the country. So they are uh, a really good opportunity. Or, for example, if there's a local CBO that you can apply to, like I know that there are, I think you said Syria is here. So, for example, there's SYE. They are a national NGO organization that helps Syrians. Or if you're in Rwanda, Bridge to Rwanda, right? So there are some in different countries. There are oftentimes an NGO that's working on the ground to help students um, find their way, and they will do so at no cost to the student. We do so at no cost to the student.
Mhm. And then practically speaking, so let's say a student, so what I hear you say is like students need an advocate. They need somebody who's going to go to bat for them, who's going to help them with the research. Hopefully this person has some kind of, awareness around some of these international institutions. Let's say a student doesn't have this advocate, they're not able to find them. Practically speaking, how does a student find schools around the world that could be a potential fit for them? Any suggestions?
Okay. Then I would say your best resource, I love this resource. So shout out to this woman, Jenny Kent and Jeff Levy. They have a really great, we'll put this in the follow-up to you guys. They pulled all the common set data sets from all these institutions in the United States and put them in a spreadsheet and made that spreadsheet interactive. And you can kind of see from that spreadsheet the average award for international students. And they also do like a whole bunch of resources that are also very valuable in regards to early decision and regular decision. But I really feel like if I had one resource, that's the resource that I'm going to use.
Yeah, Jenny and Jeff are amazing. They were on the podcast years ago, and their resource, I just put it into the chat, is invaluable, and they've even gotten better over the years. So
Yeah, they have. And thank you to Jenny and Jeff for doing that, because a lot of people around the world, including myself, use your lists.
big shout out, and I'm so grateful for the work that they do because I imagine it is not easy to pull all that together. So I'm so grateful for both of their leadership in our industry and for students and counselors around the world. So yes, double, triple big shout out to Jenny and Jeff. And we've got that resource there. So just to get into the weeds a little bit, so let's say a student has this resource and they've got, okay, here's this list of schools. You don't have to get into like the full step by step, but they've got this list and maybe the student's overwhelmed by that list. What do they do? How do they start to sort of comb through? What should they be thinking about when they're looking
Yeah,
at
they should be thinking about schools that give the highest amount of aid, and also that there's a number of students that they give it to, so you can kind of see this on the common data set. The fewer the students, the harder it is.
right?
But the lower the aid amount also tells you something, that they may or may not give full aid. You've got to kind of use that list against what the institution says on their website. And you need to really look carefully at the language, because there are schools that are need blind but gap. You
Mhm.
know, they will not meet your full need. So you need to kind of look for language that says we will meet your full need. And it needs to be full need beyond tuition. Sometimes schools will say we offer a full scholarship, but what they really mean is we'll offer a full tuition scholarship. That doesn't
Mhm.
help you, right? And then I've seen students, I was in Rwanda a couple of years ago, and I had a student come up to me and say, I've gotten into this school. She mentioned the name of the school. And I thought, oh gosh, this is not going to work out because I knew that that school only offered a full tuition scholarship. So she was saying to me, how do I get now room and board? You can't negotiate this, guys, at the end of the cycle. So please don't say to yourself something like, well, I'm going to just see, and then I'm going to negotiate with them once I get the package. You've got to make sure that institutionally they are able to do it from the first place. So if you're applying for a school that only offers full tuition, they don't offer room and board, and you need the room and board to go, you're you are it's a non-starter. Okay, it's a non-starter. And counselors, as a counselor myself, I would not permit kids to apply to these schools when I knew that they needed full financial aid because I knew that the outcome was going to be a huge gap that would not be able to be overcome.
And a lot of disappointment.
Yeah, there's a lot of disappointment. You're asking for it. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are reading everything really carefully. So you're looking at Jenny Kent's list, and you're also doing a lot of research, institution by institution by institution. Okay, you're not just going by word of mouth from your friends, and you're really looking really carefully at this. And then, if possible, you're discussing it with your counselor, and you're
Mhm.
showing your counselor your research and saying, "What do you think about this?" You know, and so it it is really research heavy because particularly in the United States, it's not centralized. You can't go to one website and get everything.
Right.
And so, you know, it's really important that you do that. It's really important that you go beyond just what your friends are saying. Okay, I've also seen that. I've seen a lot of people just depend on hearsay, and that is also not useful.
Mhm. Let's stay on financial aid a little bit. How is the financial aid process different for full need international students?
For fully international students. It's in general, and I think we've kind of discussed this overall, and but to kind of encapsulate this, because as we close down, it's it's more competitive. Okay, it's more competitive for students who need full need than students who are full pay.
Can you talk a little bit about the additional information section and how that might play in?
Yeah, so if you are a full need student, you need full tuition, room and board, and there's as you know, on the Common App, there is an additional information section. It is helpful to put down your context, okay? Because, you know, and context meaning your educational journey. Okay, so if you're a student who has progressed from primary school to higher levels, middle school or junior school, whatever you call it in your country, to high school. And that was through a series of merit scholarships because you're academically talented. That's a signal. Okay. So you want to include that in the additional information section. And you can include information about, what kind of family that you're coming from. Like if you're coming from an agricultural family or a farming family, you can also include that. It is also helpful in the additional information section to include when you started to speak English.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's helpful for us to know if your school is an English medium school or if you're learning English and speaking English outside of that school. Because sometimes it's not clear on the school profile. And sometimes kids, you don't have a school profile if you don't have a school counselor, right? And so the more that you do to provide some additional context about your school, if you are attending a very selective school in your country that required you to take a test, there's like a school in Rwanda that picks the top 30 boys and the top 30 girls, and it's all for AI. It's like a coding academy.
Wow.
Say that. Say that out of 30,000 kids, that this is what would require to get into your school, because it might not be that the higher ed institution in the United States that's reading you will know that information. So include it in the additional information section.
Mhm.
And finally, Ethan, it's really important when you are a financial aid student, okay, you need financial aid and you're applying to institutions that require you to prove that you need financial aid. You need to do the documentation. You need to do the requisite documentation. So you've got two big pieces to work on. You've got the Common App in the United States and you've got your financial aid documentation. That can include things like the certification of finances, okay, the IFA FSA, the CSS profile. And you want to be as clear as possible. And when you don't understand questions on that, you want to ask your counselor. okay? Or you want to look them up so that you understand what is being asked, because the CSS profile and the IFSA, they are more US centric. You know, they are international, but some of the language is American centric. So I say this because I had a student many years ago. I'll never forget this case. Oh my gosh, this was like 15 years ago when I was in England and I was working with a Sutton Trust kid. And a Sutton Trust kid is a kid who has made it to the top. I mean, he had to go through a very selective process to be in the top um, cohort of students that we were working with who wanted to go to the United States on a full scholarship. And he had filled out his CSS profile wrong. And
Hmm.
that wrongness cost him, well, it was about $7,000 times four, so 28,000 USD, which he could not afford.
Yeah.
So we go back and redo the CSS profile, and then we had to resubmit it to that school. And that was arduous and unpredictable. And they did change his package, but part of it was that he was living with his brother had a disability, and he did not recognize there's language in that that is different from how the UK describes disabilities, and so he didn't understand, you know, what some of the language was. And I hadn't looked at the CSS profile before it went out, and so from that point on, I did, and I've learned that that's really important to also as a counselor verify that. So.
Mhm.
Um, Make sure that you're meeting deadlines both on the Common App side and the financial aid documentation side.
There are some wonderful questions that have come in, and we're going to get to them. We're going to be staying a little bit over time today, tonight, this morning, whatever time it is for you. Before we get to questions, though, I'd love to know, Joan, there are so many folks, there are a couple folks have asked, how do they learn more about Second Chance, get in touch with you? Will you share a little bit more? Because you have, wonderful resources, both like written things, but also like as a person, you are an amazing resource. How do folks learn more about Second Chance, and what opportunities do folks have to like just either get to know more about the work that y'all are doing, or how can counselors learn more about this work?
We have a website. We can send you the website afterwards. It's www. It's Second Chance, and .global. And what we do is we have a very short nomination period around the time that April 1st. You know how April 1st, that's like the national decision deadline, right? Decision release. Most decision releases happen around April 1st. Around that time of year, we open up for a very short period of time um, the opportunity for people to nominate students to us. Okay, so we have a nomination period, and then we have an even shorter time for kids to submit an application to us. I think this year it was like 3 to 4 days. And then we select a cohort, and we go through a rigorous type of selection. So kids apply, and we look at the quantitative piece, we look at the qualitative piece, we do an interview as well to see if you can get along with other students, and how you are interacting with your community in person. We also check your nominators to vet and verify them to make sure that everybody is real. And then we select a cohort, and then we work with that cohort. We assign you a pro bono counselor, and we work with you relentlessly for 8 to 12 weeks until you're seated. And we work with a number of partner institutions who are willing to look at students at the last minute and also consider them for a full scholarship at the last minute. And then we help you understand other systems. So we work with a number of Hong Kong schools. We help you understand how to apply to schools in Hong Kong, what Hong Kong is looking for. You know, we do that with a number of countries. You know, we have a special program with Georgetown University of Qatar for Palestinians. And so if you are a school, and I know there's a number of schools in the United States that have Palestinians on scholarship, and you're looking for um, a second chance, and the student is social sciences orientated, like international relations, economics, history, politics, you know, we would consider them to be part of the program. So we have an overarching cohort. We work as a cohort, and we try to do in 9 weeks what I usually would have done in 9 months. And we will help you with also understanding how to save money. We will connect you with alumni. We will give you a little bit of financial literacy support. And then we'll do a pre-orientation where we help you understand how to navigate an airport, what a flight looks like, what to expect on a flight. And then usually in some countries, we have a second chance student come and pick you up at the airport when you land. So that's what we do. Excuse me. And so if you're a counselor, all you need to know is that if you join our mailing list, you will get a notification about when to nominate students. We are really selective at this point, and we want to seat everybody that we take. So we do look for all the things that I've talked about on this webinar. And let's see, that's what we do. We're like an emergency room. We're like an emergency room for admissions. I always thought to myself, you can get social goods like housing at the last minute. You can get employee benefits at the last minute. My goodness, you can get a plane ticket at the last minute. Why can't you get higher ed at the last minute? You can get healthcare at the last minute. You can get an emergency room at the last minute. Why don't we have some mechanism for this in our industry? We do a lot of things early, okay? Like, okay, let's get ready in 10th grade and 9th grade and 8th grade even. But we don't have something that's a mechanism for something that happens at the last minute. And I felt that in 2018, when we saw all those students from Nepal, they saw that all their futures disappeared in a matter of a day. And they'd been working to go to this school for years, and students from Nepal, Nepali teachers they're not trained to write teacher recommendations. So all these kids were trying to help their teachers write recommendations, teach them what a recommendation looked like. In other words, kids were leading the faculty of their schools. They go through all of this to get a scholarship revoked at the last minute. And sometimes things happen, or you do the best you can and you plan, and you take your best shot and you don't make it. And so that's kind of what we're here for.
Yeah. I put in the chat here, a link to join Joan's email list if you're interested in finding out more about stuff that's coming up, that she's offering. So I want to encourage y'all to join that. And Joan was a little shy because Joan has an awesome course coming up, and she was a little shy to talk about it. But I was like, please talk about that. So this is a particular boot camp that's available for counselors, and it's very small enrollment. But will you just say a little bit about what this boot camp is going to be, and
Oh,
just tell counselors how it's going down and what's happening, because it seems like just an incredible opportunity.
thank you. Well, like twice a year, I do a boot camp for counselors. This is not the main thing that we do, right? The main thing that we do is placing students, and we're not yet at the point where we can kind of do more courses, but I'd like to do more courses because I see there's a need, and counselors are so good at trying to upskill themselves. And so I offer a boot camp, and it's a boot camp specifically on list construction. And the reason it's on list construction is because I feel like that is the key. Getting a good list down is really important for a student. It can really make the difference between them going or them not. And so I offer a boot camp on how to look at the US landscape. We go into more depth than what we've done here in this webinar on the various buckets of how you can get financial aid in the United States. And then you can bring cases to this boot camp, and I will live coach you through the construction of your list. So we will look at your list, and I will help you see your blind spots and be specific about my suggestions. So at that point, I will say, okay, let's add this school, or like add that school, or okay, knowing that this is the profile of the kid, why don't we look at this? And it will be a global list construction. It won't just be the United States list construction. And so I limit it to 10 because 10 is, I think, a good small cohort, can also build a community, and the community can stay together after the boot camp. In previous boot camps, I have had people say it has made the difference between a student getting financial aid or not, or having information that has led to that. So, and I'm offering one on November the 22nd, like that's in a couple of weeks. It's on a Saturday. It's on a Saturday because of the time zones, okay? Not because I want to make you work on a Saturday. And it's like 3 to 4 hours, and we will meet each other. I'll go through principles in more in depth. I'll go more in depth over like specific mistakes kids make, specific mistakes I see counselors making, quite frankly, and best practices. And then we will do live coaching over list construction. So that isn't, and I can send out details for that. There is a fee for that. So, and that's on November 22nd.
Thank you. Yeah, you'll see more on that in the link in the chat if you click that. And there's a little registration link inside. Maybe Diane, if you wouldn't mind sharing separately the registration link, that would be awesome too, just so that folks have that. Okay, this has been wonderful. And so I'd love to tackle some of these questions. We've got 84 questions. We are not going to answer 84 questions, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a few of these that I think could be useful for a number of students and counselors. So friends, stay with us if you can. We'd love to have you. And if you need to go, it'll certainly be in the recording that we follow up with all the links and things. So let's see. I'm going to comb through some of these. Mm, 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 mm. There are some really niche questions, and I'm sorry if I don't answer your very niche question, forgive me. Um, Some of these you'll be able to Google. So for the person who asked, for example, what websites should I use to apply to international schools, not in the United States, it'll depend on the institution. So that'll be, institution dependent and different schools, different institutions. There will be some sets of institution that have, schools where you can apply to like a group of schools via one application, but largely that's going to be like, institution dependent. Um, Mm, 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 mm. There's so many of these are so niche. Thanks for your patience, friends, while I comb through these. Um, okay, let's go for this one. I think some students will have this question. If they apply to a school using early decision and they're not given admission, will students still be considered for regular decision?
No. So if you apply early decision, I think the person is asking then, do I have another chance in regular decision?
I mean, it's implied here, but it's like if
Okay.
you're
Reading that right?
rejected, yeah,
Yes.
if you're
If
rejected
you're
for that.
rejected, oh, okay. So this person is thinking each round means that you can apply in the second round or the third
Move
round.
to the next round.
Okay, so that's a really good question. Once you pass the early decision round, you don't get another shot. Okay, so if you're rejected in the early decision round, no, unfortunately, you cannot apply to that school again in the regular decision round.
Mhm. And you'll be notified of that by the school to the student who's
Yes.
asking.
Yeah, that's
How
a
about
that's a good question. And that is a question that education, so that question indicates to me that the student may or may not have a counselor, probably will not have a counselor. So I would say to that particular student, if there's any way that you can get in touch with your Education USA office, because your Education USA office will be able to explain the differences between ED, ED2, RD, and the implications. It's a really good question, but it indicates to me that the student doesn't have a counselor.
Mhm, mhm,
And that's okay. That's okay. I would just say to that student, please see if you can find some support in your community in
mhm,
terms of an advocate.
mhm.
A great question, smart question.
So for students who don't have a school counselor, another one that could be true for students on this session, how do they go about submitting a school report or some of these other aspects of the process that are typically go through a school counselor? What would you recommend for those students?
That you have to find a teacher at your school who is willing to, or somebody who is in an administrative position in the school, who you can, and kids, you're gonna need to take the lead here, okay? You're gonna need to book a time with that person and just say, look, this is really important to me. And you're gonna need to have a relationship with that person and have them act in the capacity of a school counselor. Okay, so a principal can act in the capacity of a school counselor, or sometimes somebody in the administration or the leadership, and they are usually the ones who will submit a school report. But the transcript has to come from the school. Like you as a student will be submitting an unverified transcript if you submit it. a third party has to submit that. So it's got to either be your school, or um, in some cases, an NGO can vouch that they can verify a transcript, but there has to be transcript verification. And the reason for that is because people don't want fraudulent documents, right? We don't want, if we're gonna, if an institution is spending that much money on a student, that student needs to be real and true and verified. And so try to find somebody at your school who can be an advocate or who can sit in that seat for you and walk that person through it. Like, don't just go to the person and say, you need to do this, okay? Because they won't know what to do. Like, it might really require you sitting down with them and like going through it and saying, here's what we think. And you might have to do it together, actually. That's what I've seen some kids do.
Mhm, mhm. One thing that we haven't talked about at all, well, not too much. You've alluded to it, but and this is sort of a big picture question. That's not one that came in, but I see questions related to it. Do you feel like things are different at all this year than in years past? And if so, how?
I think that probably there are students outside the United States right now who are scared of applying to the United States because of what they're seeing. And I will say that on college campuses are communities that are intentionally designed to include international students. If you're applying to a school and a school has a policy that is removing barriers for you, you are welcomed. You are welcomed. So I would say that the difference this year is that there's a lot of fear, rightly so, around applying to the United States. And it's volatile. And I guess I will say that I would hope that that doesn't prevent you from applying.
Mhm.
I still feel that uh, students on campuses are welcoming towards international kids. We at Second Chance do send kids to the United States after April 1st, and we haven't seen a difference in how students are treated. Does that answer the question, Ethan? I hope I read that
I
question
think
correctly.
so. Yeah, I do. I think so. So one student, then this could be speaking for other students as well, asks, how do we compensate for an average or a low GPA?
Well, it depends if that low GPA is a low GPA because in general, um, everybody's getting a low GPA. Okay, so for example, in the additional information section, if the highest GPA is a low GPA, then your low GPA is not as low as you think it is. Okay, however, if your low GPA is true, okay, and you are at the bottom quarter of your class, I would say that this is, I hate to say this is a very, 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 very difficult proposition. I don't even know if I would look at the United States in this case, and I think that you should be looking at local options as well. Okay, because really what we've been talking about is that the bar is very high. It's super high to get a full scholarship in the United States. And so if you are, for example, on the continent, if you're in Africa, you can there's the MasterCard scholarship where you can um, so you're not necessarily coming to the West, but you're going to another country that will offer you a full scholarship. So that's how you can get some global mobility. So you want to kind of look in proximity to where you are, or for example, if you're in Southeast Asia and you're um, in close proximity, for example, to India. India has a lot of and a growing number of institutions that give full or near full scholarships, and engineering in India is very high. So you can also look within your region for opportunities.
Mhm. We're going to wrap here in just a minute or two, but I'm wondering, Joan, what you sort of alluded to this earlier about what you hope folks take away, and you mentioned the importance of um, you know, geoswerving, we sometimes call it, broadening their perspective. Um, if you had to speak to counselors in particular, what advice would you give to counselors who are advising international students? Because I imagine there are quite a few on the call.
If you're an American counselor at an American school with international students, I want you to know that the narrative of the student doesn't begin with them entering America. It began before they entered America, and that should be reflected in advocacy materials. So one thing that I see that is a mistake that counselors sometimes make is that they begin the narrative of the student with when they landed at the school. And we don't have a sense of who the student was before they entered the school. And so this, you're almost like a little bit of an investigator. You want to ask the student, where did you come from? How far was it from the capital? When did you start to learn English? Why did you want to study abroad? How did you end up here? How did you find our school? So I'm really kind of speaking to the community that's kind of like boarding schools really in the United States. And if you're a counselor who's outside of the United States and you're working with students who are trying to go overseas, I would say do as much as you can to educate yourself and to increase your expertise and your skills and your advocacy. And I would even go so far as to say that if you are able to invest in that. So oftentimes there are schools that outside the United States will not pay for you to go to a conference. They will not pay for you to go to something that's regional or professional that will offer you professional development. And it is my position that, and I believe that it is okay to say, well, I'm going to go anyways. I'm just going to pay for it. Because in my own career, I have done that. And I've done that because it will come back to me. A kid who doesn't make it comes back to me, and then I'm still in the same position. So I kind of thought to myself, I want to skill up. I want to really, really skill up and learn this. Not everybody is able to do that. I'm in a really fortunate position that I was able to do that. But I would say, in general, try to reach out for resources that you can. Or if you're a counselor and you've never attended an Education USA session on US universities, go.
Mhm.
Go even though it's outside of school hours, because it will help you. It will actually make your life easier, okay, at your school, because you'll have information and then you won't be guessing and wondering and that sort of thing. So I would just say make as much effort as you reasonably can, given your circumstances and your context and your resources, to try to because really, even I feel like a counselor in this context is more than a counselor. I really feel like a counselor in this context is helping with huge issues. Like
Mhm.
you are you're potentially helping to bend destinies or change trajectories or help with global mobility. You're almost like a global mobility broker, I feel,
Mhm.
to use a kind of more ruthless term. But I feel that your role is so important. Please do not underestimate the role that you have when it comes to students who need all the barriers removed. I don't mean to put pressure on everybody, but I do think that the role of the counselor is important. It's critical. So I want to thank all the counselors who made the effort to come tonight on their evening, because it's evening in the United States or it's in the middle of the night in some parts of the world, to stay up and to try to get some more information on this. And thank you to students for your bravery in trying to open doors for your own future. Thank you for being so brave.
As we wrap here, I want to share just one more resource for students and for counselors, and I'll screen share real quick here. We've got a few resources here that we put together, and here we go. Um, when students are, going through this process, we have sort of our college application hub, and we've also got a resource hub that we put together, inspired by Joan, honestly, a couple years ago, of thinking about what are some of these requirements that are needed. What are the details of the English proficiency exam? What are some of the mistakes, Joan has talked about them, that international students make when applying to college? How do you develop your list? How do you calculate the true cost? The thing we didn't get into in the details of, but when you get into sort of the financial aid, there are hidden costs. There are, extra things that you'll have to pay for. There's a list of schools that are actually cheap. These are affordable options under 10,000 USD a year. You'll see some brainstorming resources. You'll see some stuff on the personal statement, writing the UCAS personal statement. We've got our supplemental essay guides. That's for all the students who are applying this year, for all the, many schools, and just in case students haven't seen these are our supplemental essay guides, and lots more on here. So I'll put that in the chat. Um, and yeah, as we wrap here, Joan, what would you like folks to know? Any final words?
Yeah, I want to speak to the student who asked the question about the low GPA. So if you're still listening, okay, I would like for you to take the long view, which is kids, if you don't, there's also grad school. So I think that I want you to know that it's the longer game that you're in. So for example, let's say that you are able to get to um, a country that's in your proximity for undergrad. You can also apply to the United States for grad school. So let's try to take a long view here with your life. If you're in a position where you're like, gosh, I don't think I'm going to be competitive after listening to what we've been saying, please take the long view. Okay, please persevere and take the long view. And otherwise, I just want to say, Ethan, thank you for having me on your podcast. I admire you so much. I admire what you all do and then the resources that you provide to everybody around the world. I know so many counselors who depend and who lean on the resources that you and your team do, and I really admire what you guys do. So thank you so much for the work that you all give to the industry. Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. I appreciate you so much. And we've got folks in the chat saying we need a part two. So you can be best bet that I'm going to send Joan a WhatsApp message after this and try and convince her to come back sometime soon. So thank you, friends, for being present with us tonight or this morning. And yeah, you can look forward to more sessions in the future. And thanks, y'all, again for being here.